Welcome back, everyone, to the Modern Mom's Roadmap to Balance podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Nettleton, and our guest today is Ashley Fields. She's a licensed clinical social worker and mom of two who is passionate about work with women and improving perinatal mental health in the U.S. Ashley has worked for the last 13 years in nonprofits focused on strengthening families. She spent 4 years running an internship program and providing supervision for therapists in graduate school. Ashley teaches MSW students at Indiana University. She is the owner of Elevate Therapy and Consulting, where she helps women to rediscover themselves in the midst of pregnancy, postpartum, and career transitions. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Kayla.
Yes, and thanks for being here and taking the time out. I know, as therapists, our schedules can sometimes be a little bit crazy. So thank you again for taking this time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I love to do things like this. So it's nice to have the space. Gives me a little bit of extra life, fills me up.
Yes. And so with the question I ask everyone, what is your definition of a balanced life?
Yeah, I literally just had a conversation with my own therapist about this week. And it's something that I have been contemplating for well over a year myself, just as I have
Mm,
moved into private practice. Part of the reason that I did that was around balance. And so I think for me, there are several different components of what that looks like. There is an understanding of what your values are, right? Like,
mm,
what are the
yeah.
things that are important to me and how do I want to show up in the world for the people that I love, including myself, my family,
Mm,
my friends, what responsibility do I feel I have to my clients? And then how do I want to show up for myself? I think my values around that are really important for how
mm.
I find my own balance. And then I think with that, I don't know if you have any like very type A listeners that feel like they feel like they have to do it all. But what I have learned probably the hard way is that I have to have some radical acceptance around the fact that there are 24
Mm.
hours in a day and that all of the things that I might want to do or feel obligated to do just may not always have the possibility of getting done. And then I have to be honest about my capacity. Something that I've
Mm.
learned in doing work helping people for a long time is that I am not ever the therapist that could see 30 people in a week. I don't have that capacity.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
and so I think I value one-on-one connection. So my values are there. I have to have radical
Mm.
acceptance around the fact that I can't do it all. I have to have
Yeah.
honesty around my capacity, which is that I if I want to show up as the best version of myself, both for my clients in therapy and then to my kids after I'm done at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I have to really limit the number of people that I see and not judge myself for that. I really have to
Mm.
stay out of judgment because there are people that have the capacity to do that. And
Yeah.
comparing can be hard.
Hmm.
And then I think intentionality is the last piece. Like I really have to, for me, I have to take intentional steps towards my values and towards my capacity. And that's when I feel like in the best place balance wise.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think what a lot of people struggle with too is that intentionality, taking that time to really think about what is important to us. What do we want to prioritize and giving ourselves the permission to do that.
Sure. I think it's so easy to like live life on autopilot, right? You do the things that you have to do
Hmm.
without ever considering what your values are underneath that. And then we get to feeling tired and burnt out or unfulfilled, and we wonder
Yeah.
why we're there, but we've never stopped to ask ourselves what we care about and if the actions that we're taking, if they're purely obligation and not centered in the things that we care about, or if there's some sort of overlap, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And part of that too is sometimes because yes, I am like 90% positive that there's many type A people or recovering perfectionists and people pleasers, because I'm one myself, that we've learned like the hustle culture. We've learned things that, what is the word? Leave us at risk for burnout.
Yeah.
And we've learned all those strategies because that's what we were getting praised for. And
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to disconnect from that and find a different way because we're so connected to that praise and getting things done and what that means about us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in culture in the US, like
Hmm.
there's so much expectation for performance, for not just
Yeah.
like hard work, but the amount of time that you're putting into something. Then you think about like motherhood and the expectations to just balance it all and figure
Hmm.
it all out and do it all well. Like that expectation is so, it's so weighing. And then it makes it
Hmm.
really difficult to feel like you have the capacity at times to check in
Hmm.
and figure out if you're like living the life that you want to be living in the
Yeah.
way that you want to be showing up, or if you're just doing what you feel like other people are expecting you to do.
Hmm. But again, that takes you having the willingness to slow down and really think, is this what I want for myself?
Yeah.
Is this what I want for my family? And I
Yeah.
loved that you had brought up paying attention to how you want to show up,
Mm.
not just paying attention to all the things we want to do, but how we want to show up in the world with our for ourselves, for our families.
Yeah. Yeah, a year or two in from this process of like slowly but surely chipping away at like what balance looks like for me, I would say at the front of that journey, I felt like it was, oh, look at all of the things that I want to accomplish. And today it's
Mm.
much more, well, how do I want to show up? I don't really care. You know, my accomplishment will come. But if I don't feel good about how I accomplished what I accomplished,
Hmm.
then that's a problem for me. And so it's almost become more important and more forefront in my mind that I go through the journey, not just get the end result, but
Yeah.
go through the journey as the person that I want to be.
Hmm. Yeah, that is such a fantastic reframe for that because a lot of us are successful, and when we have goals or we have ideas that we want to achieve, a lot of the times, especially for our listeners, they're going to achieve those things. And it's so the success is inevitable, but how can we achieve that success without burning ourselves out, without spreading ourselves too thin?
Yeah.
Can you talk? You were mentioning radical acceptance. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it is giving up the internal battle for perfection instead of getting mad that the idealized version of what I hoped the future would look like or the present would look
Mm,
like isn't how I think radical acceptance for me has been working to like be both realistic and hopeful at the same time, being able to hold those things at the same time, being realistic and being
mm,
hopeful. And I think also staying out of judgment around my
mm,
humanity. So staying out of judgment around my limitations. Radical acceptance is not like being angry that I can't see 30 hours a week and show up for my kids. Radical acceptance is saying, yeah, like my ideal week is 3 days a week with 7 to 14 people that I see so that I can be done
Mm,
at 4 p.m. and then go be with my kids. And
yeah.
I understand that I am not going to show up how I want to show up if I do more than that. And instead of being angry that I don't have more capacity than what I do, kind
Mm,
of flipping that and having a sense of gratitude that I do now understand that about myself so that I
yeah.
can show up how I best show up.
Mm.
Did that
And
answer your
what is,
question?
oh yeah, yeah. And how has that allowed you, what I want to say is like, how has that set you free? That sounds so cheesy, but how has that given you like more energy and time with your kids, like changing that
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah, so it's interesting that that's the question you asked because like the word that was coming up for me like after I got done talking was like there's a sense of freedom. There like
Mm,
it's a lighter self, it's a weight off my chest and I think I think it has given me freedom in multiple ways. I think from the standpoint of like showing up for my kids, I'm a more
mm,
patient mom. I'm
okay.
able to
Yeah.
have like conversations with my kids
Mm,
and my partner. Like I'm not just needing to leave and excuse myself because I'm like so
mm,
overwhelmed capacity wise that I like can't have a conversation with you. It allows me to be more present, I think, as a parent. And then wider than just, parenthood for myself, it gives me the capacity, the time to spend on
mm,
other things that I really care about, both professional pursuits and
mm,
and personal pursuits as well. And it feels more aligned, like more right within myself that
mm,
like
mhm,
I am getting to like make the decisions about what's right for me instead of feeling like I just have to go along with the expectations
mm.
of people around me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up that yes, it's you're more patient as a parent, you're probably more present, and you also get to do professional things that you want to do because we as moms still get to make the choice to do something for ourselves. It isn't just all about our children.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And this podcast is an example of that, right? Like because I don't have a schedule absolutely bursting, I get to do something that I really enjoy, which is having a conversation
Yeah.
with you about this topic, among other things. That's why I have the capacity to be able to teach. That's why I have the capacity to be able to train. And I've been lucky that some of those other things have turned
Yeah.
into like streams of income for me as well over time, but it didn't necessarily start out that way, but just having
Mm,
the capacity to be able to do the things. And then outside of work, I really enjoy traveling and gardening and
mm.
yoga, and I have been able to like make decisions, like conscious, intentional decisions, not always easy to follow through with
Mhm.
decisions. It's been very hard as a person who would rather like make, make people happy first. But I have been able to integrate those things in my life so that I also prioritize, making myself happy.
Mm. Yeah. And how has that shifted since like becoming a mom?
Mm.
Did you notice any shifts? Like, I mean, yes, our priorities are usually different before we have kids, but how did motherhood shift this idea of, okay, I need to change something. I need to become accepting of the journey I'm currently on versus how life was before kids.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna swear here, but kids, everything up, right? Like
You're welcome to swear.
you think you have some idea of preparation for motherhood. Like I'm the researcher, I do all the things. I like trained parents for years before coming a parent myself, like in like parenting class, you there's a difference between like knowing and then like you're in the thick of it and now right?
Yes.
And so I think simultaneously, as soon as I had my first son, two things began to happen. One, I just realized this is hard and and there is no way that I'm going to be able to show up for my job at the time in the way that I did before. I worked all the time. I didn't have great boundaries, and immediately,
Mm.
when my son was born, we had a lot of challenges. I had a perinatal anxiety disorder that was really hard. We had breastfeeding issues.
Mm.
And so if a new baby isn't already taking up a lot of your time, like then
Yeah.
when things don't go as smoothly as you would have liked, it takes up even more of your time and even more of like your mental capacity. And so immediately, one of the two things that happened was I was like, what I did before is no longer going to work.
Mm.
I'm going to have different boundaries around this. Like I care about my son more than I care about my work. Yes, I need to have a job and I want to go back to work, but it just can't look the way that it did before. And everybody's
Mm.
just going to have to be okay with that. And there was part of me that was saying that, right? And then there was another part of me over here, like, I am I good enough to do this? Like,
Mm.
what are people going to think if I hold these boundaries? Can I do this? So there was the need to hold
Yeah.
boundaries, and then there was a lot of the guilt and concern
Mm.
and all of that I think plagues many parents as they're getting started. Am I doing this right? Am I messing up my kid? Am I,
Yeah.
do other people have this figured out and I just don't? All of those different things. And I found that my need for boundaries was also just really driving this self-critical piece. And I had to do my own work in therapy. And as I did that, I was like, oh, what if, like, there is a part of myself that thinks if I'm hard on myself, that will make me hold better boundaries. But that actually is not helping.
Okay.
Like
No.
being hard on myself is, imagine that, like not
Mm.
helping me. And so I went through this slow process of learning to be more kind to myself, being open to like being called out on being kind
Mm.
to myself, giving myself a break around setting those boundaries. And eventually, I would utilize things like, if you've ever heard like, don't say that to my friend, right? Like if I would catch myself saying something like, oh, like this is a moment where I'm just like not a good enough mom. Well, I wouldn't say that to my
Mm.
best friend. So
Yeah.
why am I talking to myself that way? And so it was like a slow and painful
Mm.
and tedious process of shifting my language and paying attention to how I was talking to myself and paying attention to that part of myself that was worried about the boundaries, but wasn't necessarily helping me in a useful way. And then slowly but surely, and I won't say that it's like just fixed and perfect forever, but definitely those moments are far less today where I like criticize myself for holding a boundary or for not showing up or for making a mistake as a parent, right? Like it,
Mm.
it happens, but it's gotten a lot better over time. And that has actually, I think, then helped me to set better boundaries, because then I don't have the guilt around setting
Okay.
them,
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that's a really great point, because what I've seen is so many people are trying to set boundaries, but they don't have that foundation of compassion,
Mhm.
self-compassion, to allow them to be able to set and hold these boundaries. So criticizing themselves or beating themselves up about not being able to set the boundaries is getting in the way, like you
Mm.
just described.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so hard, because I really think that that part of ourselves, it is trying to help. Like, it is worried about our well-being. It wants the boundaries to be set, and its like only tool is criticism. And so being able to like give that part of ourselves something else to do, or to like be able to like reframe that from like, what if it isn't the criticism that like makes the changes? What if it's the holding yourself with compassion,
Yeah.
and celebrating like the times that you do like hold the boundaries, the times that you do like distance yourself from that guilt and choose compassion. Like, what if instead of like judging the lack of boundaries, we celebrated each time that you chose to have compassion with yourself and set a boundary? I have found that that's a much greater motivator, but it's
Mm,
not the first instinct for me, or it wasn't
yeah.
at the time. I would say that's a bit
Mm.
different now.
I think that's probably true for many of us. That's not our first instinct. I had recently seen, well, not recently, it's been a while, I guess, but I don't know if you've seen that. I don't know if it's a meme. Are memes only funny? Well, anyways, so this
I
this
don't know.
image that I saw, are memes the one that they're funny? Is a meme also something that like I'm wondering like what's the definition of a meme? Anyways, it doesn't matter. So I had seen this image on Instagram, and you've probably seen him. It's a man, and he does quotes with balloons.
Mhm.
The They're balloons and they're letters. So he writes the quote in these balloon letters.
Mhm.
And one of them was, if beating yourself up, it was like if beating yourself up or self-criticism worked for you, it would have already happened.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's usually the first thing, is we're criticizing ourselves, we're beating ourselves up. And obviously it's not working if we're feeling so bad.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
this
And
is
if then
permission
also
to change that.
nothing is still changing. Like, if we're just feeling bad and also there's no change, then like, what evidence do we have that that method is working for us?
Mm-hmm.
And could it be that a kinder approach will yield us a better outcome?
Yes. Yes. And you had mentioned that you struggled with anxiety disorder. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit more about that? I know that's one of your specialties, is helping women identify and work through these perinatal mood disorders. How does one notice that this is something that they're struggling with? Because early on, there can be some anxiety in motherhood.
Oh
But
yeah.
how does one differentiate from, this is a little bit normal, versus this is something I really should get help with?
Yeah. Okay, y'all. So I'm a therapist, have been for a minute, was a social worker before, have done a ton of work with moms who are pregnant, who are having babies, who are postpartum, like a long time. I got pregnant in 2018, had my son in 2019, and I at that time, like being trained at the master's level, I did not have advanced training on perinatal like mental health and presentation, and I just didn't
Mm,
know what I didn't know. I had my first symptom of a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder at 5 weeks post post conception. Like
Okay.
I didn't even know yet that I was pregnant when I
Mm.
had my first symptom. And it was one of the scariest things of my life. Like I just randomly had suicidal ideation. And I
Oh.
was like, I don't know what's happening. Like things are fine in
Mm.
my life. Like, why am I feeling this way? And then like that, I was like, do I need to go to the doctor? Do I need to call my like, what is happening here? And then I found out that I was pregnant. Like that same week is when I actually found
Wow.
out that I was pregnant.
Okay.
Got into the doctor. They gave
Mm.
me the PHQ-9, which is the patient health
Mhm.
questionnaire. It's 9 questions that help to screen for perinatal depression and anxiety. And if you are pregnant, I hope that your doctor has screened you for this at some point. But that was I took that, and then the doctor was like, "You doing okay?" and gave me a pamphlet on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And that is when I found out that it's not just postpartum. I just heard postpartum depression, postpartum
Mm.
anxiety, and I thought this only happens. Like I naively thought this
Yeah.
only happens after you have the baby. And then I see in this pamphlet that like no, it can happen at any point from the time you get pregnant. Like technically the
Hmm.
perinatal period is to a year postpartum. I have different feelings about that because you don't stop being, you don't
Yeah.
stop being a parent who's had a child even after that. But that was my first experience with that. And so just a couple of facts. 1 in 5 birthing people will be diagnosed with perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, and 1 in 10 partners. So partners,
Mm.
even though they are not the birthing person, can also
Yeah.
be diagnosed with perinatal mood and anxiety disorder during gestation or after the fact. And so that went away. Like that one instance of those scary thoughts went away pretty quickly as I moved through my first trimester. And then it was like anxiety. I was anxious about everything.
Mm.
I was researching everything like to the point that like it just didn't need to be researched. And then I was just like really struggling with a lot of these tough thoughts. And so it calmed down second and third trimester, and then I had my son and we had all of these breastfeeding issues, and it ramped right back up,
Mm.
right? Like I was like worried about how he was weighing, what he was eating, and all of
Mm.
that good stuff. And I actually waited an extended period of time before I got help. I got onto medication before I started back into therapy because I had stopped therapy in my first trimester because I was so at that time
Mm.
virtual therapy wasn't as popular because that was like
Okay.
pre-COVID,
Yeah.
right? And
Uh-huh.
so and so I had like stopped therapy because I was so nauseous driving that like driving to my
Mm.
appointments was not getting it was like miserable. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it. So I got on after he was born, I got on medication, and then I started therapy a bit later, and so much shifted for me in doing
Mm.
that. Like everything went back to normal. Well, not, I mean, you have a baby, right? So like
Yeah.
it's a new normal, but in terms of my
Mm.
mental health, I was not having the same symptoms that I was before. And that journey is what got me kicked off on like, I'm a therapist. Like, I have
Mm.
a master's degree and a license with years of experience, and I had
Yeah.
no idea. I had no idea what this was like for pregnant people. And so I got trained by Postpartum Support International in perinatal mental health and advanced psychotherapy for perinatal stuff. And I got trained in brain spotting through a perinatal lens. But in
Mm.
terms of yeah, so that's my story. In terms of what felt different or how someone may know that
Mhm.
something is off. In the first couple of weeks postpartum, like things are just hard in general. So if you haven't had
Mhm.
any symptoms of like increased depressed or sad feelings or anxiety or like thoughts that are just like pinging off your brain, if you haven't had that prior to having your baby. In the first couple of weeks, things can be just rough as hormones are shooting through the roof if you're
Oh,
breastfeeding,
yeah.
like so many things are getting back to normal. So in the first couple of weeks, it's typical to have like what we call baby blues. The majority of people do,
Mm,
but that's not the same as like anxiety and depression. If you are having increased, persistent sadness, excessive worry, really like a difficulty sleeping, a lot of like anger
mm,
or irritability, lack of interest or pleasure in doing things, if you feel disconnected from yourself, if the guilt and the worthlessness is like really
mm,
heavy, and that is happening even before you have had your baby, that could be a good indicator that you might want to talk to somebody. You might want to tell your doctor.
mm.
You might want
Yeah.
to tell your therapist. If you have had those symptoms, if you haven't had those symptoms and you have your baby, first couple of weeks are a little bit rough. You have some of that, but then it continues beyond that 2 week period. Or in that 2 week
Mm,
period, it is like so intense that it scares you in some way, or is like just feels off. Trust your intuition. Talk
mm.
to someone
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
I would even go as far as saying, if you're questioning, should I get help? The answer is
Just
probably
yes.
yes,
Yeah. Just do.
right?
Because what's it gonna hurt if you reach out and
Hmm.
find out, oh, this was just a really tough 2 week period? Well, at least you got some support in that time.
Hmm.
And if you don't need
Yeah.
ongoing support, then fine. But if you're
Hmm.
thinking, should I maybe get some help? Or if you're having I think also if you're questioning, like, how do people do this? And like, how do they do
Mm.
this? How do they get by feeling this way? That's
Yeah.
another indicator to me.
Mm.
Even if you haven't
Yes.
entertained, should I get help? If you're like, I don't know how, talk to
Mm.
somebody.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because I was just about to say, and this is the time where we can get caught in that comparison trap. In so many women do this all of the time. I just need to tough it out.
Mm-mm.
No. No, go get some help, go get some support. Because if
Yeah,
anything, your therapist is going to be able to support you through this transition.
yeah. This period is tough enough. It's
Hmm.
lovely and joyful in so many ways, and it's exhausting in so many
Yeah.
ways. It's hard enough as it is. Why continue to like press on in immense difficulty with no support,
Mm,
like how does that serve us, kind of back to how we want to show up, right? Like, how do we show up for ourselves in that moment? If this were our best friend
mm,
having a baby, how
yeah.
would how would we want to show up for them, to express that we care about them, that we want to support them? And I know it's so exhausting in those early days to even think about, like, what do I need right now? It can be
Yeah.
such a backseat when you're like so focused on keeping this life in front of you, appeased. But in taking care of like, if we can remember in taking care of ourselves, like, we are we then have better capacity to like show up for our child. And I don't think that that's the sole reason why we should do it. I think on a level, like, there is power in just like showing up for you because you deserve it.
Hmm.
But if your only motivator in those early days
Yeah.
is for the good of your baby, if that's what's going to get
Hmm.
you like through the doors of a therapist, if you need one, like, use whatever motivation you need to get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if someone is looking for a therapist, what are things specifically for that topic that we're discussing? What are some things that they should be aware of or watch out for? I'm definitely someone of the proponent of, if you're struggling in motherhood, your therapist should be a mom too, because like you had said earlier, you really cannot wrap your mind around this journey until you're in it. So I'm a huge advocate for, if you're struggling with things in motherhood, go to a therapist who's also a mom.
Yeah. Yeah, or a therapist who's had some level of like experience in what you are doing, right? I think it's fine to ask those questions. Do you have experience with fertility? Do you have experience with
Mm.
loss? Do you have experience with postpartum mood and anxiety disorders? What's your training like? And people who are niched in this area, who specialize in this area, they're going to talk about that, like on their Psychology
Hmm.
Today, on their website. In terms of a really tangible resource, Postpartum Support International, if you just Google Postpartum Support International directory, they have a directory of professionals who
Mm.
have put themselves into this directory because perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are their niche. So I would maybe start there. But if you haven't started there, if you're like looking on Psychology Today or you're Googling or, whatever, ask those questions about what experience do you have with perinatal patients? What experience do you have with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders? What training do you have for those things? Like, can you relate to me around like the balance of children or fertility or or whatever it may be? You deserve, and it is so important to have a really good fit for a therapist. And so asking
Hmm.
those initial questions, even just via email, even if you don't do like an initial consultation, if you need to save yourself time and energy, like asking those questions will save you time and help you to get with somebody who is specialized in this area.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us today. If someone is in your area and they're thinking, I really want to work with Ashley or I really want to get connected with her, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I am licensed and see clients in the state of Indiana, Ohio, and California. So those three states, I
Okay.
see people virtually. In Indianapolis, if you happen to be listening and in Indianapolis, I will do limited in-home sessions for postpartum and for perinatal loss. And then when the weather is nice here in town, I'll do some walk and talk therapy as well. But if you want to find me, you can do that at elevatetherapyllc.com. And I think at this point, if you Google like Ashley Fields Elevate Indianapolis, like my Psychology Today will pop up too. So you can reach me at my website. You can schedule a free consultation at my website. You can email me at ashley@elevatetherapyllc.com. I because my capacity is lower and I don't see a ton of people, that usually means that my turnaround time on responding back to people is pretty quick. But yeah, you can schedule something, you can email me and ask questions. And even if you aren't, someone seeking out therapy in one of my states, if you have a question about perinatal mental health or need to get connected to someone in your area, I'm happy to like send you some links around that too.
Awesome. And we'll get all of that hooked up on the show notes. So if you're driving, don't feel like you had to write all that down. It'll be there in the show notes. And thank you so much again, Ashley, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kayla. It's been a pleasure.